Happy Week 11 in the National Football League, everyone. This is Doug Farrar of Touchdown Wire in the USA Today Sports Media Group. And the guy over there in the orange hoodie is Greg Cosell of NFL Films and ESPN's NFL Matchup. And Greg, here we go. Another week of exciting, important matchups. But first, there is the Buffalo Bills, who fired offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey after Monday Night Football against the Broncos. And I don't want to litigate, like, does Dorsey suck and how much of it was Josh Allen's fault and blah, blah, blah. I want to get into two separate subjects. And number one is, and this is just my opinion of Josh Allen and kind of where he is, and then I want you to chime in, obviously. He's never going to be a second and third level reader like a Burrow or a Mahomes. And I almost think if you gave him a Bill Walsh or a Sid Gilman, and this is not to criticize Josh, it's just kind of who he is. If you gave him a Walsh or a Gilman, it would almost be wasted on him. I think the most important thing with Josh is what Brian Daboll, I think, did very well when he was a Bills OC, which was mitigate the risk-reward barometer. Take it back down in a good way when things get too random and manage the quarterback as opposed to managing the scheme. I mean, yes, the scheme was rudimentary. If I saw one more corner flat combo, I was going to barf. And, so it's not like what Ken Dorsey was doing was amazing, but question one is, how do you maximize what Josh Allen has while minimizing the stuff that will just literally get you fired?
Well, there's a lot there, Doug. We could probably spend the whole half hour talking about that. I just want to throw out one quick stat, if you don't mind. Prior to the Monday night game, if you look at the last 5 games of the Bills and the last 5 games of the Chiefs, in the last 5 games prior to this Monday night game, the Bills scored touchdowns on 25% of their drives, and Allen had 6 turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
The Chiefs scored touchdowns on only 20% of their drives, and Mahomes had 6 turnovers.
Yep.
So perhaps we should be talking about Patrick Mahomes being broken. What do you think?
Well, the Chiefs' offense has not been
just joking, by the way. Just joking.
Yeah, I know. Obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Let's put it this way. Well, let's start with there's a lot there. I'm not, and this is kind of off the cuff. I mean, I knew we were going to talk about this, but there's so many ways to go.
Allen is not broken, Greg. He's just who he is. This is who he's always been.
Right. Well, I agree with that. So on a certain level, you're talking about putting together an offense with Josh Allen being your quarterback. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Him specifically, not Mahomes, not anyone else. His liabilities, assets.
Well, you always start with the quarterback and what you view as his strengths versus limitations / weaknesses. Yes, you do start there, but that's not the only factor in putting together an offense. Right. So one of the things that I keep hearing, and I'm going to be pretty honest here, and I hope people understand that everything I say comes from film study. I'm not in the building. These are not personal comments. These are tape study comments.
Right.
And yes, can people look at tape and make different interpretations? Sure, they can. But everything I say comes from tape study. The Bills are not particularly talented on offense. And I keep hearing everybody say that they are a high-level talented offense. Let's now be totally realistic based on film. Okay, totally realistic based on film.
Yep.
Stephon Diggs is a high-level possession receiver. Mm-hmm. He's not a vertical dimension. They do not have a vertical dimension. They do not have a second receiver that you can really count on any kind of weekly basis. They're hoping Dalton Kincaid becomes one of those tight ends. We don't know that yet. I believe he'll get there, but we can't speak about him in the Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews mold at this point in his career.
He was my TE1 in this class. He was probably yours too. I mean,
yes,
but that takes time.
Yeah. I understand that they ran the ball efficiently and effectively the other night, but that's not who they've been at all over the last number of years. They have not really had any kind of meaningful or consistent run game. Okay? They've had no synergy whatsoever between any kind of run game and pass game.
Yes.
So this is not a particularly talented offense. So now when you have this kind of offense, now it gets down to scheming. How do you scheme to present your quarterback with clear looks, clear defined reads, so that he can function effectively. You nailed it. Josh Allen, and he's very gifted. We all know that. But Josh Allen is never going to be a Drew Brees kind of quarterback. That's not who he is. Now, having said that, you still do have to mitigate risk. I mean, obviously, you can't, the interception he threw at the end of the half the other night is a classic example. That ball, based on the coverage, should not have been thrown, and it was poorly thrown, but it shouldn't have been thrown. The first interception was not on him.
Right.
Sometimes I feel, watching the tape with Josh Allen, that the turnovers are a little bit overblown at times. It's, again, he threw last year. I think he's had 15 interceptions, somewhere in that range. I think Mahomes had 14. And I know Mahomes has won Super Bowls, and I'm not trying to make an apples to apples comparison. That's not the point here. But for some reason, and I know he's had the most turnovers, and that's a problem. Okay, that can't happen. But you have to look at each interception as an individual play, not as just a number on a page. But if you're putting together an offense with this team, that's what we're talking about, with this team, then there's other factors involved. And I hope I at least gave something for people to think about, because this is not a highly talented offense. And you have to structure it in a way that it's schemed up really, really effectively, so that it's very clear for Josh Allen. Sometimes I think that the game he had a couple of years ago, and the 2-game stretch he had in the playoffs a couple of years ago, when they lost to Kansas City in that final 13 seconds deal, that he was so ridiculously good in those 2 playoff games that people think that that's the way he's going to play every single game, and that's not humanly possible.
Right.
So, yes, does he have to do a better job mitigating risk? Absolutely. But this offense with these people has to really be schemed up. And I think that the Bills offense, just from a tape study standpoint, is a little bit predictable in what they do. I don't think they're a hard defense tactically to defend.
No.
And you can't just rely on Josh Allen being Superman. If you get caught up in that, I don't think that's the right approach.
And the simplistic route concepts I mentioned last week, a lot of 2-man stuff, not a lot of third guy. There's nothing breathing. Mike Martz used to say, you want to present a favorable picture to the quarterback. He was talking about receivers, but that's your whole scheme. You want to present a favorable. I don't see that, but I'm not in the building either. But are they limiting what they do because they think that's where Allen is? Or is that just how far Dorsey wanted to take it? I don't know.
And by the way, that could be the case, because I have to tell you, based on film study, and I watched 250 Allen dropbacks this past summer, and obviously every game this year, I think Josh still has work to do as far as what he sees, how quickly he sees it. He does tend to leave the pocket prematurely when things are going great, and he makes those special plays. You push that aside and say, "Great play, Josh," but it also can disrupt the timing and structure of your offense. So I think he needs to continue to grow. I mean, like I said, I don't think he'll ever get to the level of a Drew Brees style quarterback, but that doesn't mean you don't try to continue to grow. You have to play that way at some point in the NFL. You've got to run the offense within the structure of it. You've got to execute it within the structure of it. That's the way it's taught. The game, everybody gets so caught up, and I understand that there is a sliding scale clearly for quarterbacks that can make special second reaction plays. Yep. Do they have to be as precise from the pocket as Tom Brady? No, they don't, because they can do those special things outside of structure, and you don't want to take that away from them. You never want to say to Josh Allen, don't leave the pocket, but there's a balance there. You still have to execute from the pocket when it presents. And I think he needs to be better overall in that way.
You need to be more focused on process over outcome when you're on that side of it. If we're on the couch watching our favorite team in whatever sport, we can go, hey, outcome, that was, like Vlad Guerrero swinging and hitting a home run on a pitch that hit the dirt 3 times. I mean, okay, great, but only he can do that.
No, you're right. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And there's, as you know, living in Seattle, they went through this with Russell Wilson as well. Now Russell Wilson has different issues because he's 5'10", and there are certain things he can't see. But believe it or not, I remember having a conversation. It was the first year I met him, and I don't know him well, but Dave Canales was at one point the wide receivers coach for Seattle, as you well know, and now he's obviously the OC for the Bucs. I actually think he's doing a very good job. But
with
the
another
point I'm making is
quarterback who's kind of unpredictable.
right, but I met him years ago, and I said, "Hey, Dave, we just met, but I got to ask you a question." And I said, when Russell Wilson drops back and the design of the play works perfectly, and he doesn't throw it, but then runs for 12 yards and a first down, what do you say in the meetings? Because this stuff fascinates me.
Right.
And he said, "Well, we normally say good play, Russell." But the point is that I think at some point, if you design it and it works, and that's what coaches do, coaches work 16 hours a day doing all this stuff, that they want it executed when it shows up exactly the right way, which is not 100% of the time, obviously, in the NFL. So when it does show up, when you call a play based on an anticipated coverage, due to tendency and probability based on all the work you do, and you hit it just right, you really would like it to be executed that way. So therefore there's a bit of a sliding scale with quarterbacks that can run around and move around and make those special plays. But on the other hand, you don't want to go too far, to one side on the spectrum that they're not executing the offense.
Sure. Speaking of quarterbacks who can run around and make special plays in different ways, two guys, Bengals at Ravens, Burrow and Jackson. We've talked a lot about, and Burrow versus Mike McDonald, the Ravens DC. That's a fascinating matchup in all sorts of ways. Burrow's got the galaxy brain, and so does McDonald. I did want to get into something we haven't really talked about with the Bengals, Luan Arumo, and all the cool coverages. They are vulnerable against the run, Greg. They have allowed 5 yards per carry this season. Only the Broncos are worse. League high 29.8 of opponent runs have gone for first downs. Only the Broncos and the Jets have allowed more rushing yards per game than the Bengals, 136.9, and their 31 missed tackles against the run also leads the league. Now, I set this up to bring up one of my favorite guys in this draft who went undrafted because he's small. And I know I talked to you about him months ago. Keaton Mitchell from East Carolina. Oh, boy. Explosive play waiting to happen. He did this against the Browns. But for the East Carolina Pirates in his final year there, he accounted for 31 runs of 15 or more yards. And he forced 75 missed tackles. I mean, I thought this guy would go, mid third day, and he's blowing it up. So, what you've seen from this, and they didn't play Mitchell a lot last week, and Harbaugh has come out and said, "Yeah, that's probably a mistake. We need to get him in there more." So they will do that. But what you've seen from the Bengals' run defense, I don't know how much you focused on that, and just your overall impressions of what you've seen from Keaton Mitchell. Because I want to talk about
Yeah, I mean, Mitchell's an explosive player. So the question is, last week, early in the game, they try to get him in space multiple ways. There was a play where they sent him on a wheel route, and the linebacker actually ran with him stride for stride. And the ball was underthrown a little bit, but the linebacker did run with him, and I was kind of surprised by that. But the point is they try to get him the ball on the move in space where his speed becomes a big factor. He's an explosive player, clearly. So we'll see how much they choose to use him going forward. As far as the Bengals' run defense, I'm kind of surprised because they have good players. I mean, I think Reeder and Hill are really good players inside. I thought last week they had particular issues. I thought, believe it or not, and I think both linebackers, Pratt and Wilson, are good players, but I don't think they played particularly well last week, and that happens.
Are they almost too fancy with their coverages and their sort of? It's not a criticism per se, but do you get too fancy to the point where you can't just hit the gap and stay and keep it there?
I don't know. I don't know if that's it. I mean, I thought last week they took some bad angles. I don't think they saw some things quickly enough. I think they just did not play well. But that's a hard question to answer because normally, Doug, you know this, when teams struggle to stop the run, there's no, brilliant, sexy answer. Here's what normally happens. Guys get blocked. Guys hit wrong gaps. Guys are slow to get to their gaps. Guys miss tackles. I mean, it's not, there's no great, I mean, I remember years ago having a conversation with the head coach at the combine, and he had this number because teams have, 50 guys who do research. You and I are one person each. We
Yep.
can't do that kind of research. But it was a number of years ago, but not that long. And he had a stat where he said something like 35% of all 10-plus yard runs in the NFL happen because a player goes into the wrong gap. I mean,
I believe
that's
that.
what happens a lot. I mean,
believe
there's not there's not some amazing answer to all this.
No.
So I guarantee that they work on that. That's what they do. I mean, but like I said, I think Reader and Hill are really good inside overall.
Yeah.
And, I think they probably count on them to allow Wilson and Pratt, the stack backers, to kind of be free in their movement. And last week, I didn't think that they saw it well enough and quickly enough.
And here's what you know about the Ravens. They're going to run the damn ball. So interesting matchup.
But their run game can be kind of multiple, too. I mean, they're not just going to stick it up inside.
No. It's all of everything, and then you add the Lamar factor, and yeah.
And he did. Last week was Lamar's, first bad game of the year where he wasn't as clean as he had been throughout the season. Where I thought he's played really well, I thought last week he did not. There's 17 games, and everybody gets into that week-to-week stuff, as you well know, and I don't. I mean, there's 17 games.
Right.
You're not going to be great every single week. It just doesn't work that way in the league.
Well, if Keaton Mitchell had run the ball more, Lamar would have played better. Clear. Duh. Come on, man. So here's Cardinals at Texans, and we all know how great CJ Stroud has been. I wanted to go a little bit more into this to see how this team has been constructed and his coach. I wrote a long article on this. The receivers are all exceeding expectations. They've got a really nice 1-2 punch in Devin Singletary, who was great last Sunday, and Damian Pierce when he's healthy. They've allowed 8 sacks since Laramie Tunsil came back from his knee injury. And I find that fascinating. They're tied with the Dolphins. And the Dolphins, we all know, that's quick. CJ Stroud has the most deep completions this year of any quarterback. So this is a long, expanding passing game. And they've got all these different guys. I mean, we know Tank Dell is a deep guy. Noah Brown leads the league at 20.9 yards.
And Noah Brown has all of a sudden become a big factor.
He's just blowing guys up. He will take you out. Nico Collins is really good at finding voids and zones and making contested catches. They have Jonathan Greenard, who has 8 sacks, the edge rusher, who had 8 sacks a couple of years ago, but he has 8 sacks now. They've got Malik Collins and Sheldon Rankins, inside guys. Will Anderson right now, the 3rd overall pick, might be their 4th best pass rusher. Guys like Blake Cashman are showing up in ways they never have before. The secondary is coming together. So I think what I did this week was I tried to, as much as you can with a quarterback, eliminate CJ Stroud. How has the rest of this team been built? And I'm telling you, Greg, Texans are 5-4. I think they're a tough out. I think it's about a lot more than Stroud.
Yeah, but I love watching their offense. I think it's really well put together.
Yep.
And I love what they do with the play action pass game. I mean, through 9 games, Stroud has the highest yards per attempt on play action of any quarterback in the NFL because they do such a good job pushing it at the intermediate and vertical levels. And more than half of his play action dropbacks have been with him under center. And I'm personally a believer that under center play action is more effective than shotgun play action. But, people can disagree with that, but that's just my personal opinion. So I think they do a really good job with their concepts. I mean, a lot of Brown's catches, it takes nothing away from Noah Brown. People may forget Noah Brown, of course, was in Dallas. He was at Ohio State prior and was not a big-time receiver there. But when he came out of high school, he was a big-time recruit. I mean, he was expected to be a great player, and it just didn't happen at Ohio State. But he's a big kid who can run, and he's physical. But so much of that is so beautifully schemed. And I think they do such a nice job with the play action pass game, with the route concepts. They work off of it. And you mentioned a player who, Laramie Tunsil, I've watched him throughout his career, obviously. Mike Tannenbaum was the one who drafted him initially, and he fell. He was the number 1 player on a lot of teams' boards, but people may remember he fell because that, came out about, I can't remember every detail, but,
it was the bong hit video, yeah.
Right. That's it. But I mean, he was the number 1 player on a lot of teams' boards. That guy, the last 2 weeks, and have you gotten a chance to watch them the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I wrote a whole article about that.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that if I missed it.
No.
Yeah. But it looks like he's playing against 9-year-olds. I mean, it looks like he's out there pass protecting. He has unbelievable balance, firm base, great posture, incredibly strong hands.
Yep.
I mean, it just looks easy. I mean, if he, I think 2 weeks ago he got beat for a sack, one bad snap on like 75 plays. This week it just looked easy.
Right.
I mean, against Hendrickson, it looked easy.
Yeah,
And Hendrickson is a good player.
he just pushed around.
Yeah, so I mean, it just and the rest of their O-line, by the way, has played well too.
Yeah.
So I mean, they might not be household names. They got Fant, who was in Seattle for years, as at right tackle. They finally moved Titus Howard inside where he belongs, and he's pretty good there. This is a good O-line right now. And the thing about Stroud, because he plays with such a strong sense of timing and rhythm, is he makes the offensive line better as well. Quarterbacks can help their O-line when they play with a really strong sense of timing. You rarely see C.J. Stroud get stuck in the pocket. He knows where to go with the ball. It gets out of his hand. Everything he does is controlled and efficient. And he sees it really well. I mean, the final minute play this past week when he hit Schultz on the game-winning drive for 25 yards.
Yep.
People should go take a look at that, because that was unbelievable, because what the Bengals did is what they showed pre-snap was nothing like what it became post-snap. And you're dealing in a high-leverage critical situation with a rookie quarterback, and he noticed it immediately.
Yep.
I mean, he saw it immediately, because it went to single high cover 3. And what do you throw against single high cover 3? The seams. He immediately knew that. And it didn't look like that at all before the snap of the ball, Doug. So, he just sees things really, really well. He's so controlled, so efficient. Ball gets out, knows where to go with it. I would even make the argument, contrary to what many might believe, that the interception he threw wasn't his fault. But we don't need to go into every detail about that play.
I'll say two things about Stroud. Number one, and this helps his offensive line. He's so effective in the boot game, and they use that a ton.
And they do a ton of that.
Yes. And the other thing I noticed,
both ways, by the way, right and left.
Yes. He's not limited to either one. And I noticed I picked this up on watching his tape in the last 4 or 5 days. He can make, and I think this it's about getting the ball out quickly. He can make stick throws downfield. He doesn't, if this makes sense, when he plants his feet to throw, he can make stick throws downfield without adjusting his feet to throw. Does that make sense?
What you're saying is something that I think is a positive, is he does not necessarily need to have a lot of space in front of him to make throws. He doesn't have to he doesn't need to stride. Like if people remember someone like Matt Ryan, a great quarterback, probably a notch below a Hall of Famer, but he had to stride into his throws. Right. That's just the way he threw a football. Sure. Stroud does not necessarily have to stride to throw. So what the result of that is, as the pocket tends to get squeezed, you can still make throws because you don't really have to stride. That was something, by the way, that Doug Peterson really worked on with Trevor Lawrence, because Trevor Lawrence, when he came out of Clemson, he was a strider.
Yeah, and speed the clock.
And and you have to, in the NFL, you can do it. Matt Ryan did it for years and was great for years. He won an MVP. But you'd rather not have your quarterback have to stride in order to make every single throw.
Yeah, Matt Ryan's great. I've watched tape with him a couple times, and it also took Shanahan like 2 years to teach him how to run boots.
Yeah, he's great.
So I noticed that, and I kind of went back to other like explosive plays and watched him do this. Like, he doesn't need to stride; he's just in there and boom. So I wanted to get into the other guys with the Texans because we always talk about the quarterback. Vikings Broncos. If you had told me 2 or 3 weeks ago, Greg, that this was a premium matchup, I would have looked at you funny, but it kind of is now.
Well, by the way, do people know that the Vikings have won 5 games in a row? I would bet not.
We're going to tell them without Justin Jefferson.
Well, one of the things, I'm actually going to deal with this on the matchup show because I think it's really important. One of the things I've noticed in watching the Bronco defense, their last 2 opponents have been Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Mm-hmm. And they've game planned on third down for both of those quarterbacks to use a spy. And it's almost always Nick Bonito, who's a very athletic guy. I really liked him coming out of Oklahoma. He's a second-year player. So they're going to do that with Josh Dobbs. Now, the Saints, they spied Josh Dobbs this past week as well.
Yes.
So that's going to be really interesting because Dobbs, he makes plays. Again, now you're talking about that sliding scale I spoke about. Obviously you're not going to put Dobbs in the category of a highly efficient pocket quarterback, although he did make some throws last week. I thought
I'm
the
gonna,
touchdown he threw late in the first half to Hawkinson, if
okay.
Joe Burrow made that throw, we'd be saying,
Okay.
oh my God, what a throw.
Let's get in. I was going to wait, but let's get into it. All right. 27-yard touchdown pass to Hawkinson with 22 seconds left in the first half. Saints are playing cover 2. Hawkinson ran a post from the left slot. Dobbs moved deep safety Lonnie Johnson Jr. subtly by moving his body to the left, which froze Johnson just long enough for Hawkinson to get open over the middle on the post. Then Dobbs had to get the ball over the heads of Tyrann Mathieu and Demario Davis after Mathieu handed middle whole responsibility off to Davis. He did just that. I put that throw up on Twitter like half an hour ago. Go and watch the end zone nail because you can see how preposterous it was for that to get there over Davis with Johnson.
It was your classic. That's the term I use. That's a firm touch throw.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're not going to drive the ball because otherwise you're going to throw it right to Davis.
Yep.
And you can't loft it because otherwise the safeties, because it was cover 2, then the safeties become a factor in the play. Yes. So it has to be firm touch. And It just got over Davis. It was just a beautiful, beautiful throw. I think that he made a number of those throws in the first. I mean, he hit Addison for 29 yards on 1st and 10, which was actually a really well schemed play. But again, the Saints on that particular play, they had late rotation from split safety to single high because they're trying to confuse a quarterback that, despite being around for years, still does not have a lot of experience playing NFL games, and it didn't faze him at all.
He's been in the building for 2 weeks, Greg. He's running the
whole
offense.
And I think one of the things that really stands out, the Kevin O'Connell comes from the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay school, okay? And footwork is well, it should be with everybody, but footwork is really taught hard for those quarterbacks. Everything has to match up with your feet. And Dobbs seems to have a pretty good feel for that pretty quickly, And that's one thing I noticed on tape, and that's a hard thing to do. Because Kevin O'Connell, as some might remember, he started his coaching career, I believe, with Washington when Kyle Shanahan. I think that staff had Shanahan, McVay. I think Matt LaFleur was on that staff. I think Mike McDaniel was on that staff.
I'll mention again, Jordan Rodrigo of The Athletic had that brilliant podcast.
Yeah, she's great.
Everyone go listen to that. You'll learn like 4,000 different things.
Yeah, she's phenomenal.
And Dobbs, it's like, okay, pocket throws, improvisational out of pocket. They ran a quarterback sweep against the Saints for like.
I always wonder. And I know one thing I love about the conversations we have when we do this is, we can go anywhere we want. Yeah. I always wonder with, let's say, Dobbs or Geno Smith, for instance, if they had gotten the opportunity, and I'm not suggesting they're top 5 quarterbacks and they'd be Hall of Fame. I don't want people to think that's what I'm saying because I'm not. But you wonder if they were able to work through, some of the ups and downs, depending on where they were, if Geno Smith could have been doing this in year 5 as opposed to year 10, or if Josh Dobbs, if someone said, okay, you're going to be my starter, and by year 3 or 4, you kind of go, oh, he's a quality starter in the NFL. Yeah. I guess you will never know the answer to that. But
well, I think this is a good combination for Dobbs because Kevin O'Connell, I mean, if we want to talk like top 3 to 5 offensive schemers in the league, he's right up there. He is.
Well, and it's the background too, the kind of
beautifully. By the way, Josh Dobbs is doing all of this without Justin Jefferson. Thank you very much. So it's just one of those right place, right time where all the things click in, and you're just like, okay.
And he's going to be the starter the rest of the year.
Yep. And that'll be an interesting quarter. Someone's going to get a good quarterback either way out of Minnesota. So there you go.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's those are the kinds of things I think about when I watch tape. Is just what we were talking about.
A couple real quick notes because we're kind of going conceptual, which I love. The Vikings under Brian Flores are binary when it comes to rushing the passer. They lead the league in 3-man rushes on 79 opponent attempts. They lead the league in pass rushes of 6 or more, 103 attempts. So what's interesting, in the last 5 weeks, the Vikings have had all 3 of their interceptions on rushes of 6 or more, and they've allowed only 4 of those 9 touchdowns. that they've had it.
So how do we figure out what they're going to do any given
Well,
week?
now conversely, Greg, 49 of their 79 three-man rushes have come in the last 5 weeks, 17 against the Falcons in week 9. This is a very specific plan, and that's where I first really noticed it. Last week against the Saints, they rushed 313 times. So the blitz effectiveness in coverage is increasing, and so is the three-man. So Flores is even more like, what do you, how, what, why, how do I figure this out?
Yeah, that's the thing. So when you go play Minnesota's D, I'm sure, first of all, coaches, the opposing offensive coaches are going to have a better idea than you and I
Well,
because
yeah.
they have way more information. But when all's said and done, how do you know for sure? And the thing is, a lot of those three-man rushes come from a 7-man pressure front look with
Yes.
people dropping out.
Yep.
So, you can't just assume, okay, well, it's a 7-man front, but they're only going to rush 3. You can't take that approach, because they could rush 6, and you better be prepared for that. You have to account for that.
Another real quick note. I wrote a bunch of notes, but I know we're.
No, go ahead.
Denver's defensive improvement. Broncos pass defense weeks 1 through 5, 77.3 completion rate allowed, 9.2 yards per attempt, a league high 13 touchdowns, 3 picks, and a league worst passer rating allowed of 124.7. Broncos pass defense week 6 through 10, including the Bills game, 68.5% allowed, 6.8 yards per attempt allowed, 3 touchdowns, 4 picks, and a passer rating of 81.4. And when I looked into the whys and wherefores, there were more things in this, and I hate to say, okay, they benched one guy and everything changed, because Damari Mathis, the cornerback, was getting his lunch eaten, and they benched him. I think it was either before or during week 7 against the Packers. They brought in
Fabian Moreau is now their outside
Fabian
corner.
Moreau. Yeah,
Opposite for 10.
So
they also made a change at the slot corner.
Right.
Because that young kid, Jaquan McMillan, who's a rookie from East Carolina, he has played great football. He did not start the year as their slot corner, and he's been really, really good. The other thing, keep in mind, too, is they had a lot of young players. Like Browning, who was from Ohio State, Baron Browning. The previous coaching staffs played him more as a stacked backer. Now they've made him a full-time edge player, and he's pretty good. Yeah. Nick Benito, his second year out of Oklahoma. He's an edge player as well. He's good. Cooper's developing as an edge player. Zach Allen was a really good signing. He's just a really good inside
Watching
player.
his tape when the Broncos signed him, I'm like, this is a dude here.
Yeah, this guy, and that's exactly what he is. He's a dude. So, and say what you want. The Eagles had Alex Singleton, and they let him go, and wherever that guy goes, he just makes tackles.
Singleton has played well.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're not – and if you talk to people around the league, they'll tell you that Surtain's the best corner in the league.
Yeah, I think in press he is.
Yeah, so, I mean –
Off is a little – I don't know.
So, but anyway, the point is they don't have bad players. So they had a new coach working in his system in Vance Joseph, who's been around the league, with young players, some playing new positions. So, it takes a little time. And obviously everybody remembers the 70 that Miami scored, and that exacerbated everything. It made it seem like, oh, my God, this team's so bad. How can they even line up and play?
Right. But it wasn't like they went from, we're playing, 70% zone, now let's play 70% man. They didn't really change anything schematically. They made one move and a couple other things to,
Well, and just the younger players getting more experience with a new coach.
Yeah. So, Greg, here's a defense that has made some adjustments of late. The San Francisco 49ers. This is my homework for the week. What Greg likes to do is say, hey, Doug, I saw that the Niners did this on defense. And I'm like, well, what is it, Greg? I'm not going to tell you. Go find out. Okay. Thanks, Professor Cosell. Yeah, jerk.
It's funny because I watch the Niners. I do radio out in the Bay Area, and so I've seen the Niners for years and years and years and years. And, they started this season. They wanted to play Thomas at corner. I think he's a third-year player from Michigan. And I think he got hurt. There were some issues there because they wanted him on the outside and Lenore moving into the slot in their nickel. And like I said, with Thomas, he ended up not playing. So then they ended up playing Isaiah Oliver inside as their slot corner. And I remember doing Oliver coming out of Colorado. He's a big kid. He's 6'2", about 210. He's just not a slot corner. but obviously they didn't have anybody else. At some point in the NFL season, you got to dance with the girl who brung you. You guys don't just fall out of the sky. I love when people say, "Well, they're not good at this position." Well, okay, it's now week 9 or 10 or 11. This is the way it goes. I mean, so you know. So Oliver struggled big time, and it was an
Gave up
issue
2
for them.
touchdowns against the Bengals the week before.
But he
1-2
struggled overall.
Yeah.
And so I think they realize now that Thomas is healthy that, you know what, we're going to go back to, in our nickel, bringing Lenore inside and playing Thomas outside. And that's what they did this past week. But a couple of other things I noticed too.
Yeah, I just said Lenore to me is a much better fit as a slot corner because he's twitchier. He has better short movement skills.
Without question. Yeah.
So go ahead.
So the other thing that they did is we saw them line up with more multiple front.
Some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, they first of all they had some 5-man fronts, which you don't see a lot from them. There were some snaps in which they brought Young and Bosa inside, almost as
first 2 defensive snaps of the game. They had Warner and Greenlaw at the edge,
both on the edge, right,
on the pass play. Then they had Hargrave and Armstead outside.
Yep.
And Bosa and Chase Young inside. And I find that I think Bosa had lined up at nose on 6 snaps all season. He did it 3 times. Chase Young had not done that in Washington either. So I would love to know from Steve Wilkes, what did you see from these 2 guys that made you think you could do this? Because they had never shown that look before this game.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I think they were trying to just, I don't want to say change for change's sake, but I think they were trying to be aggressive with their approach.
Yeah.
And just try to do some different things because these guys, you're talking about talented athletes. I mean, they can do these things.
Sure.
So I think that that's.
Well, of course they can. They never had, and it's like, okay.
So and obviously, Young. I thought Young looked pretty explosive. It was evident watching that tape that they wanted to feature multiple front alignments as far as the deployment of personnel and pressure looks depending on down and distance. You made the point there were snaps where Bosa and Young were stand-up A-gap players with Warner and Greenlaw on the ball on the edge. I mean, they did a number of different things. And, don't forget, that makes it more difficult for your pass protection because all of a sudden you see Young and Bosa inside, that changes things for how you protect that.
Really? The center's like, what? No, I quit. And they have the 5. I think Gibbons is the nose on those 5-man fronts, the 5-man base fronts. And then they have those 5-man, the overload looks that we've talked about multiple times. 3 guys on one side. Warner is
the loaded fronts
and all the stunts with Warner. So it allows them to do, and you love to see it when you trade for a player like Chase Young, and immediately you're putting him in positions to.
And it's funny. Just watching Chase Young, and again, he had played for the Commanders the last 3-4 weeks and actually played pretty well. But I guess I didn't take major note of him. But then watching the Niners, he is a big, good-looking athlete now. I mean, he looks the part.
I was very high on Montez Sweat this season. I really enjoyed his tape. And then they traded him to Chicago. He had 8 pressures on Sunday. Sometimes you just need I don't know.
Yeah.
Finishing off real quick, Eagles at Chiefs. And I want to we talked about Kansas City's offense before their bye. I think we're pretty much where we were with that. The Chiefs defense. Okay, let's go. Because the thing that pops off the tape with Kansas City's defense right now, they're very tough to get a beat on. It's not like Flores where it's one thing or the. There isn't one defined scheme or structure. They're not cover 4. They're not cover 1. They're not cover 2. They do all kinds of stuff. They have 6 or 7 linebackers and defensive backs who might blitz. Their defensive linemen line up everywhere, and they're so good at changing the coverage pre and post snap. Kind of like the ideal modern defense where at the same time, you've got guys like moving and stunning on the line, linebackers doing God knows what, and the coverage is God knows what. It's really a testament to what Steve Spagnuolo has put together over the last 3 years, and this kind of being the culmination of it.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things you hit on is what they do. They have 4 or 5 guys on their defensive line who can line up anywhere.
Yep.
And they do that. And obviously Chris Jones is the guy most teams are aware of. So when he's a D tackle in sort of a split front, kind of the jet pass rush split fronts, most teams will slide the center to him, and they know that, and then they work off of that. So But yeah, I mean, Dana can line up inside or outside.
Yeah.
Omenahu can line up inside or outside. Karlaftis can line up inside or outside.
Can I
Jones
take
can
an
line
L
up.
on Karlaftis right now? Because I did not think he'd be this good when he came out of college.
Yeah, and I think he's really good because of how he's deployed. Like, I think if you just lined him up as an edge pass rusher, he wouldn't be exactly the same guy.
My thought was that he was kind of too small to be an inside guy and too not twitchy enough to be an outside guy.
Yeah,
But you can take a guy like that in the right situation, as you said, and really make
yeah.
it work.
And then they're starting to get really meaningful snaps and using him in multiple ways, as well as Leo Chenal,
Yep.
who was actually a big time pass rusher at Wisconsin. He's getting more and more snaps now.
Yep.
Tranquil has turned out to be a great signing for them because Bolton got hurt, and Tranquil plays literally every snap.
His tape with the Chargers was so good. You know, we grade trades because that's what we do. We're media, not you, me, the royal we. And I gave that one an A+ because his tape with the Chargers was outstanding.
Yeah, and they made the decision now that Snead will stay outside because McDuffie is their slot corner.
Yeah.
Slot corner, when they go to their sub, McDuffie is outside with Snead in their base.
Yep.
But McDuffie is a really good player. Snead's a really good player.
Yep.
So they when they play dime, and I think they play dime the second highest percentage in the league.
Third most opponent attempts. They've allowed 59 completions in 107 attempts for 540 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, and an opponent pass rating of 60.5 when playing dime, which is pretty good.
And they've got 3 safeties that in many ways are interchangeable. Now, Reed is predominantly the tight end matchup when they play man, but Edwards and Cook and Reed, those guys, they all can do pretty much everything. So, they've got very versatile players. They've got smart players. Like you said, they're very good with disguise and late rotation. It's everybody focuses on Mahomes, and deservedly so, but this defense, you could argue that over the last 4 or 5 weeks, while this offense has struggled, that the defense has really been their driving force.
Without question. Well, McDuffie, I did a podcast with Richard Sherman, and Sherman and I have been talking DBs for years. And I made the point after watching McDuffie's tape that he is a corner with a safety's mentality. I mean, he wants to mess you up.
And that's why he's the slot corner now, because, he's closer to the ball.
Here's the thing. There are 3 players in the NFL this year, Greg, who have 4 forced fumbles. Myles Garrett, Bradley Chubb, Trent McDuffie. Hello.
Right.
He's that guy. Now, final note, they play a ton of press coverage. Snead with 176 snaps, McDuffie with
that's a Steve Spagnuolo belief in today's NFL.
Right. And I understand disrupting the receiver to, mess up the quick passing time. I watched yesterday some A.J. Brown snaps against press. I'm not sure how invested I'd want to be in that idea, Greg.
Well, they're going to do it.
I don't know about that.
They're going to do it, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you cover A.J. Brown in general, but that's a different story. Okay. Great stuff, Greg. As always, went a little over, but gosh, so much to talk about, and awesome as usual. And we'll talk more X's and O's next week.
Thanks, Doug.